It's normal to get strange calls when working at a 911 center, but a call I received last winter still keeps me from sleeping at night. Because that night, the person asking for help was calling from a town that had been completely evacuated years ago, and the voice on the other end of the line sounded just like mine. Name is Marcus. I'm 28 years old, and for about 4 years, I worked as a night operator at a 911 dispatch center in Oregon. Most nights were ordinary. Traffic accidents, fight reports, drunk people on the night shift. You get used to seeing the worst side of human nature. But there are some nights where a single call changes your entire life. This happened in November of last year. The weather had been terrible for days. It was raining constantly and a dense fog rolled in at night. There were only 3 of us at the center that night. Me, an older operator named Helen, and Noah from the tech team. It was around 01:47 a.m. The center was almost completely silent. I was drinking coffee and organizing old reports. Then a new call notification appeared on the screen in front of me. Unknown location. This wasn't strange on its own because sometimes location data wouldn't show up due to signal issues. I answered the call. 911, what is your emergency? For the first few seconds, there was nothing but static. Then I heard a muffled sound of breathing coming from very far away, and then a woman whispered, "Please get us out of here." Her voice was so weak that I had to check my headset. "Ma'am, tell me your location." Was a few seconds of silence. Then the woman spoke again. "Black Hollow." The moment I heard that name, Helen raised her head, because a town named Black Hollow actually existed, but it had been completely evacuated about 15 years ago. The moment I saw the expression on Helen's face, I knew this wasn't an ordinary call. The woman's voice was still on the line. She was breathing as if she were crying. "Ma'am, give me your exact address," I said, but she didn't answer for a few seconds. Then a highly distorted sentence was heard. "They are outside." Then the line cut off with static. The room fell silent. Helen slowly stood up. "That's impossible," she said. I asked her how she knew about Black Hollow. After hesitating for a few seconds, she began to explain. About 15 years ago, Black Hollow used to be a small mining town. But when a series of disappearances started occurring one after another, the residents abandoned the area. The official reports cited landslides and gas leaks, but people whispered about other things. People wandering the streets at night, calls coming from empty houses, and the sound of sirens heard in the dark. I thought these were just urban legends, but Helen looked genuinely terrified. Right at that moment, a new call notification popped up on my screen. Unknown location. I answered the call. 911, what is your emergency? This time, a man's voice came through. "Help, they're inside the house." In the background, a sound of scraping metal could be heard. The man was panting. "What is your address?" I asked. The reply was delayed by a few seconds. "Black Hollow." Noah looked at us from his desk. Again, the man continued to speak. "They are standing outside the windows." Then a muffled sound was heard over the phone. It sounded like someone was breathing very close to the microphone. Then the man screamed. The line cut off abruptly. This time, everyone in the center remained silent. Noah tried to trace the line the call came from through the system, but after a few seconds he frowned. "This doesn't make sense. Call is actually coming from Black Hollow." That moment, a bad feeling washed over me. Because Black Hollow's power had been cut off years ago, there shouldn't have even been an active phone line there. As the hours passed, the calls began to increase. Different people from the same town were calling. Crying women, terrified children, elderly men, they were all saying the same things. "They're outside. They're knocking on the door. Turn off the lights." Some were just weeping. And in every single call, there was the same sound, the heavy sound of scraping metal in the background. Like something massive was being dragged across the floor. By around 03:11 a.m., when a new call arrived, my hands were shaking. I answered the call and I heard my own voice. "Marcus, don't look outside." Blood ran cold. The line was completely quiet, but that voice belonged to me. The same intonation, the same way of breathing. Helen stood up. "What happened?" she asked, but I couldn't answer. The me on the phone spoke again. "They've noticed you." Then a knocking sound was heard in the background. Knock. Knock, knock. And at that exact moment, 3 knocks came from the entrance door of the dispatch center. We all looked at the door at the same time. The outer hallway of the center was dark, as most of the building's lights were turned off during the night shift. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then came another knock knock. This time it was harder. Noah slowly pulled up the security monitors. When the camera for the building's entrance appeared on the screen, my stomach knotted, because there was no one outside. Yet the door was rattling slightly on its own, as if an invisible person was knocking on it. Panicking, Helen said, "Don't open the door." Noah laughed nervously. "Someone must be messing with us." But his voice didn't sound very convincing. Right then, all the lights in the center flickered briefly. Static appeared on the monitors, and for a few seconds a different image flashed on the security cameras. An old street, dense fog, abandoned houses, and people standing under a streetlight. They were staring motionless at the camera. Seeing the image, Noah immediately shut off the monitor, but we all understood what we had just seen. Because that footage didn't belong to the dispatch center. It was Black Hollow. Then all the phones began to ring at once, not just one. Every single line in the center. The ringing echoed through the room. The screens all read the same thing. Black Hollow. None of us dared to answer for a few seconds. Finally, Helen answered one of the lines with a trembling hand. Since the speakerphone was on, we all heard the voice. A child was crying. "I can see their faces in the dark." Helen tried to stay calm. "Where are you, sweetie?" the child replied. Mom went outside. Then came a long silence. Then the child spoke in a very low whisper. The thing that came back wasn't my mom. That moment, all the lights in the center went out completely. Only the faint glow of the computer screens remained. And from within the darkness, the sound of scraping metal began to be heard. But this time, it wasn't coming from the phone. It was coming from the hallway of the dispatch center. That scraping sound from the hallway was getting closer and closer. It felt like something heavy and metallic was being dragged across the floor. Helen had started praying. Noah turned on his flashlight and aimed it at the door, but the light couldn't reach the end of the hallway. The darkness didn't look normal. It was as if it was swallowing the light. Then one of the security monitors turned back on by itself. This time the image was clear. It showed the main street of Black Hollow. Old buildings, rusty street lamps, and thick fog, but the worst part was the people standing in the street. There were at least 20 people. They were staring motionless at the camera, and they were all smiling. As Noah stepped closer to the monitor, the image suddenly changed. The camera was now showing somewhere else, the outside of the dispatch center. We all froze. Because the footage was live, tall, dark silhouettes were standing in front of the building. Their faces weren't visible, but they were all turned toward the entrance door. The sound of scraping metal came again, this time right from behind the door. Then a woman's voice was heard. "Marcus." Breath hitched, because that was my mother's voice. My mother had died 3 years ago. Helen looked at me, but I couldn't speak. The voice came again, from very close by. "Open the door." Noah backed away in panic. This isn't possible. Right at that moment, one of the phones began to ring again. The screen read the same thing once more. Black Hollow. Without thinking, I answered it, and again I heard my own voice, but this time it was crying. "Listen to me, Marcus. Don't let them inside, no matter what." The background people were screaming. Sirens could be heard. Then my own voice whispered rapidly, "The town is still not empty." The line cut off with static. At the exact same time, the entrance door of the dispatch center shuddered with a massive thud. "Bam!" Helen screamed. A silhouette appeared in the glass of the door, a tall, human-like shape. And a few seconds later, other silhouettes began to appear behind the glass as well. Dozens of people. They were staring inside, motionless. But we couldn't make out their faces, because they were completely pitch black. Then all the silhouettes tilted their heads slightly to the side at the same time, and every single phone in the center began to ring simultaneously. After staring at the monitors in horror, Noah suddenly cursed and backed away. "No," he said in a trembling voice. One of the monitors was now showing the inside of the dispatch center. It was showing us, but the camera angle was from the ceiling. Except there was no camera inside the building that shot from that angle. The image on the screen was delayed by a few seconds. On the monitor, I was standing next to the phone. Helen was crying. Noah was looking at the door, and someone was standing behind us, tall, black silhouettes. When I turned around in real life, I couldn't see anything, but on the monitor, they were still there. They weren't moving. They were just watching us. Then the me on the screen slowly turned his head toward the camera. But I hadn't done that in real life. My blood ran cold, the me on the monitor smiled, and his lips moved. "You're too late." Right at that moment, all the phones in the center went silent. The sudden silence was even worse. Then footsteps were heard from the upper floor of the building. Thud, thud, thud. Trembling, Helen said, "There shouldn't be anyone upstairs, because during the night shift, the upper floor was completely empty." The footsteps slowly began to wander across the ceiling. Then the scraping metal sound returned. Like someone was dragging a heavy object down the hallway. Noah couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed the flashlight and walked toward the door leading upstairs. "Someone is playing a game with us," he said, but it was obvious he was terrified. Helen tried to stop him, but Noah opened the door. The upper floor was completely dark. Only the red emergency exit light was on in the distant hallway. And under that red light, people were standing. At least 6 people. Motionless, tall, black silhouettes. Noah froze in his tracks. Then one of the silhouettes stepped forward and spoke with Noah's voice. "Marcus." They opened the door. The moment Noah screamed and stumbled backward, all the lights upstairs suddenly flashed on. The hallway was empty, there was no one. But the same sentence was written all over the walls. "Black Hollow is not empty." Right then, the main computer in the center started running on its own. Old archive files were opening up. Emergency call logs from years ago began to appear on the screen. Date: November 14, 2008, the night of the Black Hollow evacuation. An audio recording played automatically. People were screaming. There were sirens. Police radios could be heard. Then the voice of a terrified operator came through. "Everyone in town is saying the same thing. The people who go out at night are coming back." But the man couldn't finish his sentence, because behind the recording, the same scraping metal sound was heard. And then another voice spoke. It didn't sound human. It was distorted, deep, and raspy. "Open the door." That moment, the entrance door of the dispatch center buckled inward with a violent crash. The glass cracked. The silhouettes outside were much closer now. And this time we could see their faces. They all looked like something trying to imitate a human face. They were smiling, but their features seemed incomplete. Then one of them slowly raised its head, and I realized that its face belonged to me. The moment I saw that face, my knees buckled. The thing standing behind the glass looked like me, but it didn't look right. Its eyes were completely black. Its smile was wider than a human could manage. And unlike the other silhouettes, it wasn't standing still. It was looking at me, truly at me. Then it slowly raised its hand and pointed at the entrance door. Helen had started crying. Noah was stepping backward, continuously whispering, "Those are not human." At that moment, the old recording on the computer continued. The operator from the evacuation night was screaming in panic, "Lock the doors. Do not let them inside under any circumstances." Then came the sound of gunshots, human screams, and then the recording cut off abruptly. The center fell completely silent. There was only the sound of the rain outside. And a few seconds later, a hand appeared through the cracks in the glass of the entrance door, jet black, long fingers. Pressing inward against the glass, Noah finally panicked. He ran toward the rear exit. "I'm getting out of here," he shouted. Helen called out after him, but Noah didn't listen. He bolted into the hallway, and a few seconds later we heard his scream. Then the sound cut off suddenly. It was the worst silence I had ever heard in my life. "Helen," I said, but the woman didn't answer, because she too was staring at the monitors. Slowly, I turned around as well. The screens showed the back hallway. Noah was there, but he wasn't normal. He was standing motionless in the dark hallway, and he was smiling just like the others. As Helen backed away in terror, the Noah on the monitor very slowly turned his head and looked into the camera. Then his lips moved. "They are inside now." At that exact moment, all the lights in the dispatch center shattered. Shards of glass rained onto the floor. The center was plunged into pitch-black darkness. Only a distant hum, resembling a police siren, could be heard outside. But that sound wasn't normal because it was getting closer. And after a while I realized that siren sound wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the calls from Black Hollow. The phones began to ring again. This time all of them switched to speakerphone at once. Hundreds of people were speaking simultaneously, those crying, those screaming, those begging for help. And amid all of them, a single sentence was being repeated. "Town is still not empty." Then all the voices suddenly went silent. And out of the darkness, someone whispered right by my ear, "Now you can hear us too." The moment I heard that whisper in the dark, I spun around reflexively but couldn't see anything. Despite this, I could feel someone's face just inches away from mine. I couldn't breathe. My heart was beating so fast it felt like my chest was going to burst. Helen was crying in a corner, but her voice now sounded as if it were coming from very far away. The inside of the dispatch center had begun to change. The walls seemed taller, the hallway was darker than usual, and that muffled hum from the phones never stopped. It was as if hundreds of people were breathing at the same time. Then, gradually, the emergency lights began to turn on. The red light made the entire center look drenched in blood. Looking at the entrance door under that red light, I saw that the silhouettes outside were now moving. They had all slowly turned their heads at the same time and begun approaching the building's windows. They didn't make any footsteps as they walked. Only that scraping metal sound was heard, like something was being dragged along the ground. I tried to tear my eyes away from them, but I couldn't because every movement they made looked wrong. They were like something trying to act human but wasn't. Then one of the phones began to ring again. This time, all the other lines went silent. Only a single phone was ringing, the old red line on the desk. I knew that line hadn't been used in years because it was connected directly to the old police frequency. Helen looked at me in terror. "Don't answer it," she whispered, but my hand reached for the phone involuntarily. The moment I brought the receiver to my ear, I first heard heavy static and then a very familiar voice spoke. This time it really was me, but my voice was trembling with fear. "Marcus, listen to me carefully. If you see them, don't look at their faces for too long." He was panting. In the background, there were sirens and shouting. "They are learning the shapes of humans." Then, a scraping metal sound was heard in the distance. While I was trying to ask what was happening over the phone, my own voice screamed in panic. "Did you lock the door?" At the exact same time, a loud explosion-like sound came from the entrance of the dispatch center. Half of the glass shattered inward. Helen screamed. Out of the darkness outside, a long arm slowly extended inward. Its fingers were much longer than normal. It looked black, and as it moved, its joints bent in the wrong direction. The phone dropped from my hand. I began to back away, but at that moment, the center's main monitor turned on by itself. The date appeared on the screen. November 14, 2008, the evacuation night of Black Hollow. An old police camera footage was playing. People were running through foggy streets. Police officers were shouting. The officer carrying the camera was out of breath. Then the footage stopped in front of a house. There was a woman at the door. The woman was crying. "My husband came back, but it's not him," she kept saying. When the police officer entered, the camera showed the kitchen, and I saw the thing I will never forget for the rest of my life. The man standing in the kitchen looked human, but his face wasn't fully formed. His eyes were black, and he looked at the camera and smiled slowly. Then, the footage suddenly distorted. The officer began to scream. The camera fell to the ground. In the last few seconds, I saw dozens of human shapes walking toward the camera out of the darkness. When the monitor shut off, the silence inside the dispatch center became unbearable. Helen was no longer visible. I shouted her name, but there was no response. Then under the red light, I noticed something on the floor. It was Helen's glasses. Next to them were drag marks on the floor. They led toward the darkness of the hallway. My stomach turned. Just as I was about to back away, Helen's voice came out of the dark. "Muckas," the voice was very muffled. It sounded as if she were crying. "Help me." I stayed frozen in place for a few seconds because that voice truly belonged to Helen. But then I noticed something. Inside the darkness where the voice came from, there were other sounds of breathing, more than one, and they were all breathing at the same time. Then Helen's voice spoke again, but this time the intonation distorted. "Muckas, let us in." At that moment, I realized it wasn't Helen. As I walked backward, my foot hit something. Looking down, I saw Noah's phone. Its screen was still on. With shaking hands, I picked up the phone. The camera app was open. I played the last recording. The video showed Noah running down the rear exit hallway. He was crying. He was constantly looking behind him. Then in the video, he suddenly stopped because someone was standing at the end of the hallway, tall black silhouettes staring at Noah motionlessly. Noah began to back away. Then one of the silhouettes stepped forward and spoke in Noah's own voice. "Why are you running?" Noah screamed. The camera shook. In the final few seconds, I saw the silhouette surround Noah. The video suddenly went black, but the audio recording continued. Noah was crying. Then his voice gradually began to change, and at the end of the video, Noah said a single sentence calmly. "The town is still not empty." When Noah's video ended, my hand was shaking. I almost dropped the phone. The red light inside the dispatch center was constantly flashing, and every time it went dark, I felt the hallways changing a little more. It was as if the building was slowly turning into somewhere else. The sound of rain outside was no longer heard. Instead, there were distant siren sounds, just like in the old evacuation recordings. Then the main monitor turned on again. This time it showed a live security camera feed, but it wasn't showing the dispatch center. It was the main street of Black Hollow. The fog had thickened. The strut lamps were flickering. And standing right in the middle of the camera feed was someone, me. My breath hitched. The me in the video slowly approached the camera. My face was pale. My eyes were completely black, and I was looking at myself with that horrible smile. Then the me on the screen spoke. "Don't you know why you're still here?" My voice sounded distorted. It was as if several people were speaking at once. "You already came here a long time ago, muckas." The monitor suddenly began to flicker with static. Then other images opened. This time they were old police records. Footages captured while Black Hollow was being evacuated. People were being loaded onto buses. Police officers were shouting. Then the camera briefly showed a small child standing among the crowd. The child looked at the camera and smiled. And I realized that child was me. My blood ran cold. This was impossible. I had never been to Black Hollow in my life. But the child in the footage really was me. The same face, the same eyes. I was even wearing the same jacket. The footage cut off a few seconds later, but my brain refused to accept it. Then I remembered something, a very old memory. They had told me that when I was little, I went missing for a few weeks. My family had explained it as a trauma that happened to me in the woods. The police had found me days later near another town. They said I didn't remember anything after that incident. The phone rang again. This time I didn't want to answer, but the ringing sound echoed inside my head. The moment I lifted the receiver, I heard a deep breath. Then my mother's voice spoke. "Muckas, you're finally coming back." My eyes welled up because her voice sounded completely real. But then the voice began to change, its tone distorted, the words dragged out. "The town never let you go." The line cut off suddenly. At the exact same time, footsteps were heard from the center's hallway, approaching very slowly. Thud, 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 then a silhouette appeared under the red light. It was Helen. But she didn't look right. Her face was extremely pale, her eyes were black, and she too was smiling. She began to walk toward me very slowly. "Muckas," she said in a calm voice, "you don't need to be afraid anymore." I backed away but hit the wall behind me. After stopping a few feet in front of me, Helen tilted her head to the side. Her movement wasn't human. Her neck bent too far. Then her mouth slowly opened. The inside was completely pitch black. And other voices began to emerge from inside her mouth. Hundreds of people speaking at once. Those crying, those begging for help, those screaming. It was as if all the calls coming from Black Hollow were inside her. Then all at once, every phone in the center began to ring simultaneously. The monitors flashed with white light, and the same image appeared on every screen. The entrance sign of Black Hollow. Underneath the rusty sign, a single sentence was written. "Welcome back." At that moment, the walls of the dispatch center began to shake. The ceiling lamps shattered. The darkness at the end of the hallway was expanding. It was as if the building was slowly being pulled inside that town. And within that darkness, I could now see hundreds of silhouettes, all of them looking at me motionlessly. Then one of them stepped forward. This time it looked completely like me. The same face, the same body, only its eyes were black, and it looked at me and smiled. "Do you remember?" it said. And at that moment, I truly began to remember. The inside of my head began to ache as if it were splitting open. The moment I closed my eyes, I saw images, foggy streets, people standing under the rain, siren sounds, and a small child looking outside from the window of a dark house. That child was me. My breath hitched because the memories were now coming clearer. I really was in Black Hollow, years ago, and I had been forced to forget what I saw there. The other me standing under the red light slowly began to approach me. With every step it took, that scraping metal sound came from the floor, but its feet weren't touching the ground. After stopping a few feet in front of me, it smiled. "That night when they found you," it said in a distorted voice, "you were no longer entirely human." My ears began to ring. Pieces of my childhood were returning. I remembered my mother crying, the police lights, the hospital room, and the same sentence being repeated constantly. "It's no longer the way it used to be." I looked at Helen's face. That thing was still smiling. Then very slowly it pointed its hand toward the darkness at the end of the hallway. "The town is calling you back, muckas." All at once, every screen in the center began to function simultaneously. This time they weren't just showing Black Hollow. The insides of different houses were visible. People were calling for help over the phone. Some were crying. Some were holding doors shut. And behind every image there was the same thing, tall black silhouettes, silently watching the people. Then on one of the screens I saw my own apartment. My blood ran cold. The camera showed my living room. My lamp was on. My couch was visible. And a few seconds later someone entered the frame, me. But at that moment I was at the dispatch center. The me on the screen walked toward the camera and smiled slowly. Then approaching the television screen, it tapped the glass with its finger tap. The exact same sound was heard from the glass of the dispatch center. When I turned my head, I saw that the entrance door had opened completely. The city was no longer visible outside. Chicago was gone. Outside the door was Black Hollow, foggy streets, flickering lamps, and people standing motionlessly. They were all waiting in front of the dispatch center. The siren sound was very close now, but it wasn't like an ambulance siren. It was more distorted, deeper, as if a living thing were screaming. Then all the silhouettes turned to me at the same time, and they all spoke with my voice, "Welcome home." That moment, the floor of the center shook violently. Noah's phone dropped from my hand. The monitors exploded. The thing that used to be Helen began to be pulled back into the darkness, but the smile on its face never vanished. I began to walk toward the door involuntarily. It felt like my body didn't belong to me. Something inside me recognized Black Hollow, and no matter how terrified I was, I could feel that it wanted to go back there. When I reached the threshold of the door, a small child emerged from the fog. He was 8 or 9 years old. And he was me. The child slowly held my hand. His hand was ice cold. Then he looked at me and smiled. "You won't leave us alone this time, will you?" The dispatch center behind me began to go completely dark. The phone sounds were fading away. Reality was as if it were melting. And at that moment I understood. Black Hollow had never been evacuated. The town was still full of people, only now they weren't human. The fog swirled around my feet. That muffled siren sound coming from the streets of Black Hollow was now inside my ears. The walls of the dispatch center behind me were slowly darkening, as if the building were rotting away. I looked at the face of the little child holding my hand. Seeing my own childhood face was tearing my mind apart. But the most terrifying part was his eyes. They were completely black. There was nothing inside them. The child pulled me toward the street. My feet wanted to stop, but my body followed him. The moment I stepped onto the street, I felt the air change. Everything was silent. There was no rain, there was no wind. There was only that strange siren sound coming from afar and the people standing in the middle of the streets. All of them were looking at me, motionless, smiling. People could also be seen in the windows of the houses. Some stood behind the curtains. Some watched through the cracked open doors, but none of them moved. It was as if they were waiting for me. Then static came from the old radio tower at the end of the street. The old loudspeakers located all over the town began to operate at the same time. A muffled woman's voice was heard. "Welcome to Black Hollow, Marcus." The voice was coming from everywhere in the town. Then the same woman's voice added very calmly, "This time the call didn't come to you." There was a few seconds of silence. Made the call. My blood ran cold. Suddenly, all the memories began to rush back. The night 15 years ago. I was walking alone in the woods. Fog covered the streets. People were running into houses. Police cars were on the street, but I could already see those things. The tall silhouettes standing in the darkness. Others were afraid when they saw them, but I could feel them looking at me because they knew me. Then I remembered something. I hadn't gone missing. They had taken me. My breath hitched. Fragmented images formed before my eyes. A dark house, a basement, an old telephone, and me. Crying as I dialed 911, the operator on the other end of the line kept telling me to get out of the house. But the thing standing behind the door was talking like my father. Marcus, open the door. The voice was exactly my father's voice. But it wasn't my father. Suddenly, all the silhouettes standing in the middle of the street turned their heads toward me at the same time. And they all spoke together. That is how we got inside. My body froze over, because now I understood. The people in Black Hollow hadn't died. They had changed. Those things were copying people, learning their voices, their faces, their memories. And once they got inside, it was no longer possible to tell the difference. The thing that was my childhood self held my hand tighter. You let us inside too, it said, smiling. Suddenly, the lights of an old police car appeared in the distance. It was slowly emerging from the fog. When the car stopped, a police officer stepped out. He was an elderly man. The moment he saw me, his expression changed. My God, he whispered. I recognized him. He was the officer who had found me years ago. The man looked at me with a trembling voice. You are still here, I tried to answer, but I couldn't speak. Because at that moment, all the silhouettes behind me had turned toward the officer, and they were all smiling. The elderly officer took a few steps back. His hands were shaking. This is impossible, he said in a muffled voice. The fog moved heavily around the street, and as the light from the street lamps fell upon the silhouettes, it looked as though their faces were shifting. Sometimes they were human, and sometimes their faces turned completely into darkness. The officer slowly drew his gun, but even as he did so, he didn't take his eyes off me. I took you out of this town that night, he said. You were the only survivor. The silhouettes behind me began to laugh at the same time. That sound was not a human laugh. It was a choked, fragmented sound. It was as if hundreds of people were trying to learn how to laugh at the same time. Then my childhood self looked at the officer. You made a mistake, he said in a calm voice. He never left. The officer's face turned white. At that moment, I saw that he understood the truth as well. I hadn't truly escaped from Black Hollow. The thing that left the town that night just looked like me. Suddenly, lights began to turn on inside the houses at the end of the street. One by one, the whole town was waking up. People appeared in the windows. All of them were looking at me. Some slowly parted the curtains. Some stood in front of their doors, and everyone's face carried the exact same smile. The officer suddenly shouted toward me, Marcus, don't look at them. Don't listen to their voice. Then he aimed his gun at one of the silhouettes and fired. The bullet hit the thing's chest, but nothing happened. The silhouette just stood there. Then it slowly tilted its head to the side and spoke with the officer's own voice. It's too late. The officer froze in his tracks. Because this time silhouettes had begun to appear behind him as well. They were emerging from the fog, slowly, silently. The officer backed away, but it was already too late. Dark figures began to surround him. I wanted to help, but my feet wouldn't move. Then the officer screamed. It was the most horrifying sound I had ever heard in my life. When the silhouettes touched him, his body began to vibrate in a strange way. It was as if something was moving beneath his skin. The officer collapsed to the ground. His screams were choked out, and a few seconds later, he stood up quietly. It was no longer him. He turned his head toward me very slowly and smiled. My childhood self let go of my hand. Do you understand now? He said. We don't kill anyone. Suddenly, the same sentence was heard from the loudspeakers of the entire town. Just get inside. Then all the people on the street took a step toward me at the same time, without making a sound, slowly, and I realized that I had to run. I started running. Along the street, the fog swirled around my feet. There weren't hundreds of footsteps behind me because they didn't make a sound when they walked. That was more terrifying. Only that scraping metal sound echoed through the whole town. The old police car was parked at the end of the street. I was trying to reach it, but the town was changing. The streets were stretching. Houses appeared in places they hadn't been before. It was as if Black Hollow was trying to keep me inside. As I ran, I caught my reflection in the window of an old store, and I froze because my reflection was smiling. I wasn't. My breath hitched. The me in the glass slowly tilted his head to the side. Then his lips moved. Stop running. Looking back, I kept running. When I reached the police car, I opened the door and got inside. The keys were in the ignition. I started the engine. The radio suddenly began to work on its own. A loud static sound came through. Then a muffled operator's voice was heard. 911, what is your emergency? This was my voice. I froze behind the steering wheel. The me on the radio continued. If you are hearing this, it's already too late. I felt movement in the back. Slowly, I looked in the mirror. Someone was sitting in the back seat, my childhood self, staring at me quietly. They won't let you go, he said, smiling, because you were one of the first to open the door. Suddenly, the final memory returned completely inside my mind. That night in my childhood, I wasn't alone in the basement. I had heard a sound. It was coming from inside the phone. I hadn't called 911. The first call had come to me. The voice on the phone was crying. It spoke with my voice. Marcus, don't open the door, it said. But the thing standing behind the basement door was begging me with my father's voice, and I had made the wrong choice. I had opened the door. Suddenly, all the windows of the car fogged up at the same time. The silhouettes outside had surrounded the car. There were dozens of them. All of them were looking at me. And they were slowly smiling. My childhood self leaned forward. He whispered right by my ear, "And now it's your turn." Radio suddenly began to play at a high volume. Hundreds of 911 calls coming from the dispatch center were heard at the same time. People were crying, asking for help. And amid all the voices, a single sentence was repeated. "The town is still not empty." Then a hand touched the front windshield of the car, black, long fingers, followed by other hands. And a few seconds later, the entire car was covered by dark silhouettes. I began to scream, but no sound came out of me, because I could already hear my own voice from the outside. One of the silhouettes approached the car and spoke with my voice. 911, what is your emergency? Then all the lights went out. After this incident, an abandoned police car was found near Black Hollow. There was no one inside the car, but it is said that the radio still works. Some nights, nearby dispatch centers report receiving strange calls. The calls always come from the same place, Black Hollow, and operators say that on the other end of the line, they sometimes hear a very faint sound of breathing, followed by the exact same sentence. 911, what is your emergency?